great to be here. I was asked to focus my presentation a little bit more on the students, since this is a student poster session. And you're going to see some technical material, maybe a few charts and things like that. There's not going to be an exam or anything like that. And I don't want you to even think about dwelling on the details of some of the plots and things. What I'm going to try to do is provide a little bit of some of the lifelong of the lessons and principles for leadership that I've had all along. And I'm going to focus a lot on the research that I do in advanced spacecraft propulsion. So with that, why don't we get started? So first, I thought I would give you a little bit of a very brief introduction of who I am. Come up with the 7 astronaut success principles that have worked for me thus far. And again, use examples of both my day job as the Dean of Engineering, and what I used to do a lot before was the researcher in the Plasmadynamics and Electropropulsion laboratory, and then have ample time for questions after that. So who am I? Well, first of all, this is how it started. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my aunt, who herself was an immigrant from the island of Jamaica, was babysitting me because my parents, who were immigrants from Jamaica, were undergraduates at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And one of the things she did, my Aunt Joy did when she babysat me, she would bring me occasionally to some really cool movies. And 2001 Space Odyssey was such a cool movie. And this movie just captured my imagination, this idea of this nuclear-powered spacecraft hurling at over 100,000 miles an hour on the way out to the gas giants in the outer edge of our solar system, and the artificial intelligence and things of that nature just enamored me back in 1968. But as much as Hal, you know, the AI agent that gets a lot of the attention in this movie, and rightfully so, the thing that really got my attention was more on this end. In other words, what could potentially and possibly send something at a distance where you cover the distance between at a speed where you cover the distance between Earth and Moon in just 2 hours or so. That's the thing that drew my attention. And normally what I'm showing you naturally, of course, is the business end of the Discovery 1 spacecraft, the propulsion system. So that was it. By the time I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was hooked, and I wanted 2 things in life. I wanted to be an astronaut and go land on Mars, but I wanted to do it in a spacecraft that I helped design, specifically the Advanced Plasma Propulsion System. So that's how it all started. Fast forward a few decades, after seeing that movie, I came to the University of Michigan, basically in a lark. After I finished up at grad school, I knew that I needed to have a few years of work experience. I wanted to go somewhere that I would be challenged. I didn't have a day-to-day job, and I'd be able to continue the research I had done both at NASA and at Princeton. And this was a great opportunity to start here at the University of Michigan. So when the opportunity door presented itself, I knocked and it opened, and I started here in January of '92. Again, the idea of pursuing advanced spacecraft propulsion, but really with the idea of hopefully in a few years after being a professor, applying to astronaut corps and becoming an astronaut. So, you know, a brief summary that you heard a little bit, came to Michigan right out of grad school in '92. If you will, worked my way up in various appointments, and went from assistant professor to associate professor, and then to a full professor. And then some people might say worked my way down to become an administrator, if you will, an associate dean in the graduate school, associate dean in research and graduate education in the College of Engineering, and then associate dean for academic affairs, and then ultimately where I am right now, the dean of the College of Engineering. I've continued even to this day doing my research on really the notion of really fast transportation, also known as advanced spacecraft propulsion system. You know, how do we get things going not only at 50 or 100,000 miles an hour, but maybe even up to speeds of over 250,000 miles an hour, which you can cover the distance between Earth and the Moon in about an hour. That's sort of what I've been dedicating my career towards, developing that technology. And you know, spoiler alert, I never became an astronaut. And as I noted, I always wanted to be, but I thought if I couldn't get to Mars myself, maybe what I can do is work on the technologies that allow somebody else, perhaps one of you, at some point to get there as well. So that's what my dedicated research has all been about. What drew me to the University of Michigan wasn't the wonderful weather or the great sports or anything like that, or the big house. It was a abandoned vacuum chamber. This vacuum chamber, which was built by the then Bendix Aerospace Corporation in the early 1960s in support of the Apollo program. And you can see in the top right, it was such a big chamber, 27 by about 30 by 20 feet or so. And you can see in the drawing a human being to get you an idea how big it is. And you'll see shortly just how big it is. You'll have a good graphic to show that. It was so big that they actually literally built the building around it or so. So that's an aerial shot from a helicopter showing, of course, that you could look through what was the top of the building without a roof, and then you could see the walls being built. That chamber was turned over to the University of Michigan, and a very enterprising department chair of aerospace engineering, the late Dr. Tom Adamson, thought this could be the basis of an advanced spacecraft propulsion laboratory. And I got a call in middle of New Jersey at some point around 1990 about applying to this place called the University of Michigan, and 2 years later, I was on the faculty. I received a huge amount of support. And so this is from a bulletin. We used to print booklets every 2 years, faculty directory, if you will. And this was from the faculty director of around 1994 or so. And each and every single one of these faculty members, some of whom are with us, but unfortunately most of whom are not with us any longer, played an instrumental role and were incredibly supportive of me as I made my way through assistant, associate, and full. But there's one I wanted to highlight, which was my mentor, Dr. Jerry Faith. He was a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He was both feared and revered. He was, in some respects, one of the top researchers, not only in the aerospace engineering department, but in fact was tops in the College of Engineering. And he didn't mince words very much. And so when I had my first meeting with him, he basically said he voted against hiring me right out of graduate school because he thought I needed a postdoc. He taught me a lot and was, again, a mentor for a number of years. And in fact, he chaired both of my promotion and tenure casebook committees to go from assistant to associate, associate to full. So I was able to turn him around, if you will. But the irony is that he was saying, Alec, you have to work hard and get to the National Academy of Engineering, and probably would have talked me out of becoming an associate dean if he lived long enough to see me achieve that outcome, if you will. And he taught me this very important notice and this lesson, which is it's not how many beans you have, but how good your beans are. So always focus on the quality of the work, not necessarily just the quantity of the work you do. So that chamber that I showed you before, lo and behold, became the cornerstone of the Plasmadynamics and Electric Propulsion Laboratory, PEPL. As I mentioned, it's a 20 by 30 foot chamber. It literally now has almost 25, well, it has about almost 30 times the pumping capacity now with the advanced pumps and so on that we put on it. Versus what it had when I inherited in the early 1990s. In fact, in the bottom right, you can see us standing inside the chamber, and those things that look like loudspeakers are in fact cryogenic pumps that we use to replace the old oil diffusion pumps that we used back in the day. We do a lot of work with a lot of different types of thrusters, if you will. And the whole point of this is that this chamber allows us to simulate space by providing the same pressures you would see around the International Space Station while we're testing these thrusters. And these thrusters are not what's used to get things from the ground into space, but once you're in space, low pressure and I would say gravity is a little bit different in the way how it affects bodies up there for a variety of reasons, then we're able to operate even with these devices in space. And the big reason why there's a lot of interest in electric propulsion is the fact that it's so propellant efficient. You can think of it as having 10 times the miles per gallon of a conventional chemical rocket system that allows you to reduce the mass of the satellites, for example, such that instead of using chemical propulsion systems, use these plasma drives that we work on, you can cut the mass of the satellite by a factor in half. And so you can literally launch 2 satellites on the same launch vehicles. And so with that, and then because of the performance of it, you can actually operate it such that it can achieve velocities of the spacecraft that you can never do with a chemical system. So chemical systems top out at 30, 40,000 miles an hour. These things can go over 200,000 miles an hour eventually after a lot of acceleration. What tools do we use? We use a lot of tools. Of course, we have to start with the thruster themselves. So I'm showing an example of a 4-thruster cluster arranged in a 2x2 matrix. So the idea is that you can operate 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of them together. We use a lot of robotic systems, like I'm showing in that little box there with that little thing that looks like a harpoon on the side. It's called HARP. It's a high-speed robotic system that allows us to provide very fast acceleration of plasma diagnostics, so we can probe the interior of these thrusters. We use high-speed cameras. We might take 1 million frames per second to understand the intricacies of these plasma oscillations. We use the same sort of plasma diagnostic system that use deep space probes to understand space plasmas. We use it for the plasma emanating from our thrusters. And we do a lot of work with microwaves, lasers, and we do also not only experiments, but computational modeling as well. And we've studied a myriad of different types of thrusters that actually span orders of magnitude in terms of power and thrust. And so starting on the bottom left, the same sort of phenomena you would associate with inkjet printers, charging up little droplets of ink and then charging up the paper in a way with a laser, so that when the droplets land, they stay to make a nice I or a T or what have you. The same technology that's used to spray out those little laser printer droplets, or it can be used for CubeSat propulsions and very, very small, low thrust but high efficient systems called electrosprays. And then you work your way up to electric power rockets like arc jets, and various type of plasma thrusters like Hall thrusters, grid and ion thrusters, and magnetoplasmadynamic thrusters, and then ultimately a world record 3-channel Hall thruster shown in the right, which is in some respects the world's first prototype engine that could be used to send people to Mars. Again, the notion, if I can't get to Mars myself, maybe we can work on technology that will help one of you get there. And in fact, we developed a prototype for NASA to do just that. And here we are, set a number of records back in 2017, and you can get a sense of the scale of it by me standing there. Many of the thrusters we operate are the size of dinner plates. This one's the size of a small table, if you will. And in fact, I'm showing an example of a concept right off the press, if you will, from NASA of a nuclear electrically propelled Mars vehicle, where it's a combination of a methane oxygen chemical system as well as these plasma drive systems. The combination would be used for both climbing out of and into the gravity wells of planets Mars and Earth, and then interplanetary cruise. So a good mix and match of high acceleration chemical and high efficiency plasma drives on a single nuclear powered spacecraft. So that gives you a little bit of a backdrop of the kind of work that I've done in my background, because so that you'll see that when I talk about these 7 astronaut success principles that have worked for me, I'm going to pepper them both with experiences from my research world, the PEPL world, if you will, as well as the College of Engineering world, if you will. So the first thing is to plot your course, get an idea of where you're trying to head to. It doesn't mean the course will stay the same all the time, but having a direction and being directional, intentional is critically important. So here at the college level, what we did is we created in 2017, Michigan Engineering 2020. We have a vision statement, the world's preeminent college of engineering. We have a strategic plan that's giving us guidance as where we want to go to. We even created a mission statement about providing scientific and technological leadership in the world, a focus on improving quality of life for all humans, developing intellectually curious, socially conscious minds as well. And again, the notion of service to the common good. And then our guideposts, our values, creativity, innovation, and daring, leadership and excellence, transparency and trustworthiness, diverse equity, social impact, and of course, collegiality and collaboration. These guideposts, these values have been instrumental. In fact, in something that we could not have had the success we've had over the last few years had we not had these incredible guideposts as our values to guide us. And it's really important that when you have a direction and you set a path forward, you think very carefully about choosing your travelers, your fellow astronauts, if you will, or so. And so I've had a fortune over my career of having amazing fellow travelers, my undergraduates, my graduate students, and my postdocs who've worked with me, as well as other faculty members who have collaborated with. So this is just an image from the chamber, again, to give you size, scale notion by seeing these people. And this is at the time, the folks wearing white shirts were my research group at the time, many of our alums, and we've had 60 graduate students go through PEPL over the years. And so that has been an amazing group of people to work with in terms of pushing the envelope in advanced spacecraft propulsion technology. But then also now, if I think about what we've done in the College of Engineering and how we were able to, in short order, have, because of term limits, replacement of most of our department chairs, who are among the most important academic leaders we have in the College of Engineering, and the fact that we were able to have almost half of those people now women, when none were women when I started. It's amazing to have, in fact, these department chairs, including Jim Sayer from Umtree here as amazing fellow astronauts, if you will, on the journey for the College of Engineering towards preeminence. So it's a privilege serving with each and every single one of these wonderfully talented individuals. Focus on action, okay? And so what I mean by that is that things are not always going to go the way you want, but making sure that we don't panic and that you understand to take action as needed. So this is a plot that was presented maybe almost 20 years ago now. And the idea was NASA was trying to develop high performance Hall thrusters, these plasma thrusters. And you know, again, this is an example where you don't need to worry about what's anode efficiency or anode specific impulse, except what we wanted is we wanted these curves, the red, the green, and the blue, to at least flatten out, if not go up to the right, and going down was bad. So the idea is, what are we going to do about that? Because this is clearly not in the direction we want to get to, because as we go to the right, these thrusters become more attractive for deep space applications. And that's why NASA was interested in this technology. So to coin a phrase that is pretty famous right now, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And so we looked at this crisis as an opportunity to do some things. And so what we did is we worked with NASA over the course of about a decade. And again, without going into a lot of details, we worked with them and developed a whole series of thrusters with multiple schemes, looking at ways in which we create the plasma, looking at the ways in which we keep the plasma from the walls and accelerate them with magnetic fields and things of that nature. And it was just, in some respects, an amazing time that we had, again, taking what was a crisis and using it as an opportunity to partner with NASA to develop arguably some of the most advanced plasma thrusters that had ever been developed in partnership with NASA. And we've taken crises that we have in society as well, both the pandemic as well as the murder of George Floyd last year. You know, the trial is going on right now. And so we said that is a crisis. And in response to that, and of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, we said it's time to take action. And so what we did is we created 5 of these community teams here. And I'm showing a community team is dedicated to education of our entire community. On the faculty, it's to establish and maintain essentially a diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, professional development program. So all of our faculty members are educated in matters associated with equity and inclusion and diversity. Similar with our staff, we have 800 staff in the College of Engineering as well. Also for our undergraduates, we have about 7,500 undergraduates in the College of Engineering. And the idea is, how do we introduce diversity, equity, inclusion, which we believe is foundational to engineering education at the undergraduate level and at the graduate and postdoc level. And we're showing, again, what the activities of the community teams are. But then 2 other things. The 5th community team is in the middle of the notion of bystander intervention training. When you see something or hear something that's not aligned with our values or the embracing of diversity, equity, inclusion, how do we equip our community to take action? And in fact, there have been recent events, even a presentation, a seminar that I was giving at one of our departments, where the presenter maybe said some things that were not aligned with our values, and people were paralyzed and did not know how to take action. And so we have a lot of work to do to educate our community in terms of you see something, say something and do something is critically important. And the very bottom is to say that we're actually looking at changing the support structure in the College of Engineering to support the departments and our other entities that are engaged in the diversity, equity, inclusion in the College of Engineering. Chase down problems. One of the things that if you're going to be an astronaut, one of the things you have to do is not only be calm, but be systematic in terms of chasing down problems, because it's not a matter of if problems are going to surface, it's when problems are going to surface. And that's true in life in general. So how do you chase down problems? Again, without going into details, we sort of didn't let this crisis go by. And I gave you an example of the different ways in which we were addressing this problem. And lo and behold, on the right, you can see the fruits of our labor. That, remember, we wanted those curves on the left to at least be horizontal, if not going up. Well, you can see that more or less we achieved these outcomes by being very, very careful, patient, but also diligent in terms of making sure that when we found problems, we understood where the source of the problems are, chased them down, and were able to retire those problems and make progress. And so the reasons there are discrete jumps between these curves is these are different successive generations of thrusters we've developed over the course of around 10 years or so, addressing and chasing that problem that was such a big crisis for NASA a few years earlier. And we did the same thing with the pandemic. And so what we did in the College of Engineering is we created this framework. The COVID Council is, if you will, the operating nerve center of the College of Engineering, and has been ever since February of 2020 or so. You can see it's an elaborate structure. It allows us to communicate with university leadership, provide communications, and both two ways, of course, with our community, work with our biggest partners of Michigan Medicine and LSNA, and then also have a lot of activities, a lot of really smart, dedicated people working in these committees that are shown on the bottom, financial modeling, continuity research, et cetera, and feed that information in. What we've done is we've adapted this framework, and now we have, instead of the COVID Council, we have the Future Campus Committee, the FCC, largely using the structure, but now it's thinking about how do we do a return to in-person instruction, research, and really on-campus experiences this coming academic year, taking this framework that worked during the pandemic and applying for the coming year. And one of the outcomes of this was a community engagement in myriad ways, which we call Victory Gardens, a way of how do we engage our community more broadly, sort of on a volunteerism basis. And that has been also very successful for the College of Engineering. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but one of the things that we learned as well is we can apply our faculty expertise in tactical needs, not just strategic, long-term strategic, but tactical needs. Things, for example, during the shortage of N95 masks, how do we recycle those masks? How do we make sure that certain procedures are not problematic from an aerolization point of view? And you can see the VA, University of Michigan Health System, et cetera. Even how do we help other colleges and schools like the School of Music, Theater, and Dance safely rehearse by using, for example, our expertise in droplet transport, computational fluid dynamics, and things of that nature, et cetera, advanced diagnostic techniques, et cetera. So applying the techniques that we use, for example, of looking at the exhausts of plumes landing on Mars to making sure that we can provide safety for all of our drivers and our passengers on our bus system. And then communicate and collaborate. And so sort of a great recent example of this is the opening of our newest building, the 61st building in the College of Engineering, which is the Ford Motor Company Robotics building, state-of-the-art facility. It's a 4-story building. 3 stories of it, 1, 2, and 3 are dedicated towards a robotics institute, but the 4th floor is dedicated towards Ford Motor Company. Ford is going to have about 100 of their researchers in this facility, therefore co-located with our own faculty members, staff, students, and postdocs. And we had a virtual coming out party, if you will, press release, if you will, of this facility, unveiling of this facility, about a month ago on the 16th of March, if you will, which was very successful. And I'm showing there is Ken Washington. He's Ford's Chief Technology Officer. He was really my biggest partner in terms of creating this facility. He's also the chairperson of my leadership advisory board as well. And then ability to remain agile. And this is a kind of a funny story, which I won't have time to go into, but the bottom line is that we had a very enterprising and a person who was able to promote his thruster called Vasimir. And some of you may have even heard of Vasimir and this idea of this variable specific impulse magnetoplasma rocket. And I'm showing Franklin Chang-Diaz. He's a former astronaut. He flew in space 7 times or so. And what we're able to do was there was a lot of, I hate to say, there's a lot of jealousy towards Franklin Chang-Diaz from my field. A lot of people thought he was getting a lot more press that he deserved, and then that we could do the same thing if only we put our minds to it. And so to make a long story short, I challenged our people in the Air Force and at NASA saying, we say we can do the same things, but why don't we go ahead and demonstrate we can do the same things? And so make a long story short, over the course of several years, we developed a series of thrusters, starting off with a demonstrator called the X2, just to demonstrate the idea of an unusual configuration of concentric plasma rings in these thrusters, working our way up to the world record X3 that we had, which has performance every bit as good, if not better, actually, than the Vasimir rocket itself. So instead of sitting there and saying, why is he able to do this? How come we can't do it? We were able to roll up our sleeves and use, really, in some respects, his ability to promote the field as a way for us to get into the business of developing these high performance, super high power thrusters. And then we did the same thing in some respects, because what we decided to do was we wanted to take all the different online and remote learning enterprises that we had throughout the College of Engineering. And we said, we have an opportunity. There's Georgia Tech and other places are focusing more and more on online. We need to do the same thing. So just like Franklin Chang-Diaz forced us to be focused on developing our own plasma technology at the highest level of performance, looking at what Purdue and Georgia Tech and other places were doing, forced the College of Engineering to do the same thing as well. So we need to be agile to be able to pivot when needed, when the competition demanded. And I can tell you, this has been extremely helpful throughout the year of the pandemic. And along those lines, we were able to pivot when we approached Jim Sayer and others about the notion of maybe it's time for UMTRI and Michigan Engineering to become one and the same family, if you will. And then we started this back in July of 2019, and this discussion, and I think the rest is history, if you will. And one of the embodiment of why this has worked out really well was, of course, the $10 million Smart Intersections Center at Ann Arbor. And also what we have is an additional activity at Corktown facility, co-sponsored between the College of Engineering and Ford Motor Company, as a matter of fact. And then staying calm and optimistic is critically important. And that has been extremely important, especially this past year with the pandemics we've been facing as a society. And so I like to say, if you can imagine it, you can build it or so. So for us, we've been imagining the idea of, is it possible to build a thruster that you can operate at full power for 3, 4, 5, even 10 years or so? And said, well, if we can imagine it, maybe we can build it. And make a long story short, we imagined it, we built it, and we're in the process of demonstrating the quote unquote immortal Hall thruster. And then you can beg the question, is it possible to have the best confluence of infrastructure plus onboard technology, sensing and AI technology on vehicles to have an order of magnitude or greater reduction in terms of fatalities in car accidents? If you can imagine it, you can do it. And so one example of how we're trying to imagine and do it is this notion of the Detroit Ann Arbor Autonomous Vehicle Corridor. First in the nation, a 40-mile stretch or so between the Ford Motor Company Robotics building and Detroit and the Corktown facility that allow us to facilitate the technology needed to make automotive travel even more safe than it already is, and to really usher in the era of not only driver-assisted technology to the next level, but truly autonomous driver technology. So the last thing I'll keep saying, it's always important that you keep moving and keep learning, and hopefully you've gleaned that from my talk. And with that, I think there's time for me to answer a few questions. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and turn it over to you, Henry.
Thank you so much, Alec. That's a very inspiring talk. Really fast transportation. I never think of in that way in terms of the connections between aerospace engineering versus transportation engineering. You know, when I prepare my introduction on your background, and one thing came into my mind is that both rocket science and transportation science has been impacted by the company like SpaceX and then Tesla, right? It was all coming the same founder and same person to build these two companies. And that also shows how innovation really can impact the world. And then so at this moment of time, I think we have so many opportunities for the students, and in either in the space science or in transportation science. And yourself, it's academy member, National Academy member. You're also a rocket scientist, and you not only do research, but you also build these thrusters and then build the startup company. And so I want to just you shared the 7 lessons you have, but I want to just add some follow-up question for the students and what they can prepare themselves for, particularly for the technology innovations. And this as I mentioned, at this moment of time, there's so many opportunities there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say, if you had asked me that when I was a student, I certainly would have had a different answer I'm going to give you right now. But I would say very succinctly, I think it's really important that every single student becomes knowledgeable about machine learning, AI, and data science. I think it's critically important. That is a mainstay technology that permeates even the thrusters I talked about. We're applying machine learning to glean subtle trends that humans could never pick up, that'll help us give insight into the physics, in this case of the electron transport through the plasma, and therefore help us design. So that's a tool that's going to be really, really important. It's critically important. I mean, there are other things I could talk about from that, but I wanted to hit something that I didn't talk about, which is if there's one skill set that I think is critically important, it's that. The other one, maybe there are two, is communications. Incredibly important to think about communications, oral, written, etc. And that goes into the notion of being able to work in teams, being able to make your point respectfully, but also being a really good listener and making sure there's good dialogue.
Excellent, thank you, excellent. There's a question from the audience I'd like to ask you. What are the challenges that the college is facing in training students that are pursuing a career in this complex and regularly changing transportation industry?
Well, that's sort of it. It's almost like, by the time you go and grasp for it, it's moved on. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to thread the needle in a couple of ways. One is we're trying to provide a solid foundation based on good science and good engineering fundamentals, because it's not like we're going to teach you all the engineering you know. What we need to do is be able to teach you the skills you need to extrapolate what you know now and apply it and be agile and things like that. Understand problems, being able to understand where a crisis is one side of a coin, opportunity is the other side of that same coin. And so how to take lemons and make them into lemonades, if you will. It's critically important to do those type of things as well. But again, what's been problematic as well this past year is I also believe that for most of our fields, the way humans learn and the way engineers learn is by repetition, doing, using as many senses. And so it's a very different situation in terms of watching somebody do something on the screen, but to do it yourself and understand it's different than what you had imagined. Why is this thing not working? And so much of what we learn isn't by when things work, is when things don't work. And then you have to figure it out in real time with your team. And so this notion of doing engineering and learning engineering by practicing as an engineer while you're a student, which is why I'm really committed to making sure that we can get back on campus this coming academic year. We need to.
Yeah, that's I also really want to get back to office meeting with the student as well. And you also mentioned in your journey, the fellow travelers together with you is very, very important, and that's an important part of our life and part of our research enterprise as well. I have another question. This is more on transportation research, and I know there's audience from the research field as well. The last question also asked, the transportation system has been, experiencing revolutionary changes. Whether you talk about electrification, connectivity, automation, and all of these are really, really impacting what we have done and what we're going to do and things like that. And you also list a few projects in your presentation that the University of Michigan has been at the forefront of some of these changes, and whether that's safety pilot, and then the Ann Arbor connected environment, M-City, and then the latest smart intersection project, and now the robotics building. It's also exciting. So I guess I'd like to ask you, what do you think of the state of transportation research at the University of Michigan, and in what aspect you think we can improve to maintain our lead in this critical in the space, but also in the critical time?
Yeah, well, so I would say we have a lot of activity. We have, I would say, a lot of people, a lot of churn, a lot of potential energy. Huge amount of potential energy. And I think we have, we're continually, if you will, converting that into movement, momentum, if you will, okay? But I think we have an opportunity to shape the nozzle, if you will, so we can do a better job converting that potential energy into kinetic energy. And what I mean by that is, I still think there are a lot of distributed activities, and maybe there's not as much coordination across the board. And I think there's going to be an opportunity to do this coordination. If I go back to my thermodynamics rocket analogy, there's a lot of entropy in the system. The question is, how do we reduce the entropy, if you will, and turn the heat into thermal energy that goes into accelerating the gas through the rockets or so. So I think we have all the ingredients. We have the right chemicals, or that we know the mixture ratio, everything like that. I think, frankly, now that we have this activity, this new center that you have, is critically important. I think as the robotics building actually kicks in, and that becomes more of a nucleus of what's going on. Of course, having UMTRI part of the College of Engineering has been instrumental in terms of, if you will, shaping the nozzle more. And then, M-City, we'll have discussions in terms of, what does the future of M-City look like as we think about it from our entire mobility robotics ecosystem, if you will. Because you think about it, we have M-Air, we have the corridor, we have everything you need, even big vacuum chambers for space robotics, right? We literally have everything you need conceivable to have robots, not only that operate on Earth, but in space. So how do we use that?
Yep, I'm looking forward to it. And I see another question. I think it's interesting. I'd like to ask you. The attendees, the person say, I appreciate your commitment to DEI. Do you have advice to any student that are experiencing difficulties finding their voice and place within academia?
Yeah, I don't know if I do. It's a common challenge. I think never stop searching for allies, never stop searching for people who can support you is critically important. And then a philosophy that I've had, and I attribute it to my parents perhaps, is assume best intentions in people and assume people are inherently good. I think it's, it can be easy. And, and this is from experience, especially maybe when I was a little bit younger, to think of people's interactions with you with preconceived notions. And so that there's confirmation bias into the system, that anytime you see something that could be perceived as a slight, you think it's a slight. And my parents used to say, people don't think about you nearly as much as you think about yourself, or that you think they think about you. And so I think being really careful in terms of making sure how is it that we approach others, and then how we're interacting with people, and are we listening? And then again, finding allies is critically important. So, but don't give up. It's really important. It's not easy by any means, but it's really important. We need all of our voices there in academia to make academia better for everybody.